At the time of this recording, Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs. But what if we were to stretch to have a paradigm shift of how we view Bitcoin and money? I'm honored to have my guest today, Jeff Booth, join me on the podcast. He is a visionary entrepreneur, investor, and author of his book, The Price of Tomorrow. His journey into the realm of economics and finance has been nothing short of transformative, and he is a steadfast advocate for Bitcoin, and his insights into the potential of this digital currency are unparalleled. Through his examination and commitment to first principles thinking, he's come to view Bitcoin as not just a currency, but as the cornerstone of a new economic and financial paradigm, one that is equitable, inclusive, and stable. Before we get the show started, just a reminder, please subscribe, like, share, comment of what you think about the show. This was definitely a stretch for me into this big conversation. Listen in, enjoy. Let's get this show started. Welcome. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
No problem at all, Patrick. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's this is the second time on the show, so anybody listening, we'll put the link in below to the show you did. A lot has changed since you did the show. I think it was in 2021 is when you did the show, and a lot has changed since then, and a lot of, I guess, water under that bridge when we talk about what's going on economically. So thanks for coming back. And so, Jeff, let's get into the conversation today, because what's hot right now is the conversation around Bitcoin. And I want to be cautious not to use the term cryptocurrencies. I just prefer to talk about Bitcoin, and we can kind of go off on a tangent if we want. But you're you're a strong proponent, if that's the right term. You understand it well. Let's talk about Bitcoin. Why is it going up? Why does it matter? Let's kind of open up the conversation there.
Yeah, so this will play out right off your last show, and if you understand kind of what's happening, and most people don't, it's super easy to see. It's like super easy to see. We have a financial system in the world today that is based on credit, and that credit must grow exponentially forever and fight the deflationary forces of technology. So what should happen in a free market, the natural state of the free market is deflation. Now think about what that means, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody nods their heads when I say that, because they know it's true, because we use things that give us more value, and entrepreneurs solve problems and create more value, and we wouldn't use things that didn't give us less value. So everyone nods their head, economists alike nod their head, and that's true. And then go straight back into an environment that is inflationary and try to protect all of their assets from that inflation, which is really just manipulation of money. And everybody's inside that system measuring Bitcoin. All Bitcoin is doing, if it stays decentralized and secure, which is inevitable, I think, it is repricing everything in the world, and because in Bitcoin terms, all prices are falling to the marginal cost of production, and they will forever. That means real estate will. That means Google's cash flows will. That means all things are being repriced in Bitcoin. And then what people are doing, and why it's so easy to see, but people are doing is they're converting Bitcoin to the currency that's being manipulated, and then thinking Bitcoin's going up, because they're measuring everything from that currency, and they're making tremendous errors in their judgment in that. And actually that's what's driving most of the errors across people investing in the wrong things as well, because they can't see that that something that's outside of the system, it's the only thing that's outside of the system, is repricing the entire system.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting phenomena around the education and the shift that's happened. Certainly it's been going on for many years, but where it's really starting to show up, of course, is in the past 4 or 5 years, since the pandemic and all the things that went on, and the quantitative easing, and the real printing of money. And when you talk about a manipulated system, I don't think anybody at that, up until really over the past 2 or 3 years, people even had a concept of that the system was, or maybe is, being manipulated. or is being manipulated, however you want to kind of approach that. So this is all a brand new conversation that I think many people, number one, are still not aware of. Secondly, I think it's challenging for some people to understand. And I know that there's, guys like you, Michael Saylor's a big proponent. He does a great job, like you, of explaining certain things and why Bitcoin is what it is, what fiat currency is about. But let me just kind of have a question for you, Jeff, in terms of when we talk about a manipulated system. If do you have a simplified way of
Yeah.
describing what manipulated means?
Yeah. So just remember everything that most people measure from, and I mean everything,
Mm-hmm.
is from that manipulation. So that why what we're talking about is so confusing is because of that. And that's why you have to think about in first principles. If prices fall to the marginal cost of production in a free market, and we know that's true, and it's why your calculator app is free today, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a line of code, and what's the cost of a line of code? Zero. It's why AI is free today. What's the line of code created by other lines of code? And you can see this moving everywhere. So that is the free market. But everybody's measuring the free market from something that must keep prices going up, and the only reason prices go up is you create more monetary units to make them go up. And you don't have a vote in those monetary units. Now, by the way, Patrick, this has been going on for way longer than people realize, because it's a system. This is what I wrote about in my book. And my book was published now 4.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written in the year preceding. And I said the free market. So people are measuring inflation from zero. They should be measuring from the implied deflation rate of the free market. So what that means is their money is being stolen from them at an ever increasing rate, and what should be happening is all people on this planet should be getting richer by the natural rate of deflation flowing to us in the form of lower prices. So anything that stops that by manipulating money supply is essentially theft. And where that theft comes from, why do you think? So today, I'll just use an example that's been going on for ages, right? But we don't see it because it's just starting to enter our minds here, because the rich here are getting richer and poor here are getting poorer faster. So we're starting to see it. And one of the things that people protect themselves from that is buy real estate, because it still loses value, but it loses value less fast than holding cash. But that means if you held a whole bunch of real estate and somebody didn't hold real estate, then inflation is wage deflation, and they're stealing from you out of that, right? So you're trying harder and harder to keep up, and your rents are going higher and everything else, and real estate's going higher, and some people are winning from that transition. The government's winning at a bigger deal, but some people are winning, and more and more people are losing. And we're just starting to see it in first world countries. But we've been the greatest beneficiaries of the theft over third world countries. So in a free market, you would think cobalt, which is required in all the batteries for electric cars, would be valuable, and countries that produce cobalt would be rich. Well, in Democratic Republic of Congo, 70% of the cobalt supply comes from there. What happens is the IMF makes loans so that the loans can't be repaid back, and you keep revaluing the currency down. So they make $2.50 a day or an hour, working in terrible conditions to be able to extract the cobalt. That means our system imposes massive losses on some people for massive gains on others. Essentially, we're extracting, it's modern day slavery, and we're extracting from the world to be able to keep up our way of life. And then in our way of life, just a different level, we're starting to see it affect our way of life. But this is the way the world's been built for a long time. And why Bitcoin is changes that like completely is nobody can stop it. Because if it's decentralized and secure, it doesn't matter how much you print your money against it. Right. So I would have your listeners go and look up Bitcoin price and relative to their currency, if it's Canada or the US, and they'll see it's just starting to hit all-time highs if you expand that view to the maximum. So just go on Google, hit Bitcoin price Canada, hit maximum, and you'll see it's just hitting. And then do the same thing in Argentina. Do the same thing in Turkey. Do the same thing in Lebanon. Do the same thing all over the world. And what you'll see is totally different rates of Bitcoin price,
Mm-hmm.
all relative to essentially how much manipulation of money is in those currencies. It doesn't care. It is repricing everything. It doesn't care what a government says their currency is worth. It doesn't care what, if you want to price it from your house, it doesn't care. It's repricing your house. It's
Mm-hmm.
repricing everything. So my lake house in the last 4 years has fallen from 300 Bitcoin to 20 Bitcoin.
Wow. Yeah.
In 4 years, it will probably be worth less than 2 Bitcoin. So it's repricing everything. And so
Mhm.
if I want to measure my lake house in fiat dollars that are debasing, it'll look like it's going up. So I what confuses me is why this is so confusing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I showed somebody a chart not that long ago of house prices going up, and compared. It was a chart showing relative to incomes, and of course, incomes have not gone up, and Canadian real estate prices have gone off the charts. And he says it's interesting. He says that most people would look at that and they don't. They actually think that house prices have increased. And the reality of it is that our monetary system is breaking down and our dollar's worth that much less. Like, he immediately saw that kind of
Totally.
fundamental difference, whether he described it right. It's and I come back to one of the things that I point out to people all the time is I go, okay, so the central Bank of Canada is looking at this and going, okay, we want to stay at that 2% inflation rate. And I said, where does that even 2%? Who decided that 2% is the right inflation? Obviously, they did. But then I look at it and I go, well, 2%, let's just extrapolate that a little bit and let's play that out over 10 years or 20 years. But let's say over 10 years, that means that inflation, they've eaten up 20% of your income. And has your income gone up 2% per year to keep up with that? And that's just to keep up with it. And of course, we know that inflation depending on what you're looking at, has outgrown that, has been beyond that 2%. And at that point, people start to wrap their mind around it a little bit. But I think
Can I
when we
just
look
pause
at,
you? Can I just pause you there?
sure,
because
please.
because I think, and because there's a couple things embedded into that which people believe that are just factually inaccurate, like massively inaccurate. It shouldn't be measured at 2%. It should be measured from the rate of deflation.
Yeah.
So if the rate of deflation is in the natural world right now is 5%, and it should be getting, and as more and more productivity AI comes, it should accelerate, and the next year it should be 10%. Then 2% is actually 7% or 12%. And it's not 2%, it has to go higher. So what's
Yeah.
happening, all that's happening right now is people are starting to realize the rate of theft from them. Why 2% is really simple. If somebody came in and stole 2% of your stuff each year from your house for an entire year, you might not notice it was gone, right? And then they
Mm-hmm.
sold 2%. You might not notice those little things were gone until later on, 20 years later, you realize what happened. That's why 2%. It's theft. You don't have a vote in the rate of theft. You don't have so what does democracy look like when you don't have a vote in the rate of theft? It is just theft, nothing else. And so
Mm-hmm.
when people, and I don't know what else to call it, because
Yeah.
you have no vote in it. And so when people realize this and they're living inside that system, and it's way worse than they think, they're just starting to recognize, maybe I shouldn't listen to the system that has regulation to protect you from a system designed to steal from you. Maybe I need to look outside of the system. And that's what Bitcoin is.
So when you talk about Jeff, when you say deflationary. So let's just kind of unpack that a little bit. When we look at technology, that's pretty easy to see in my world, just how deflationary things are. Everything from I think it was you that used the cost of music, for example. You used to buy an album with a dozen songs on it. It used to cost you $20 or $25. Now you can get an unlimited amount of music for a few dollars a month. And so it's changed. That's deflationary in terms of what you're paying and the value that you're receiving. So when you look at technology and you talk about AI, but when we go back to, let's say, when we do look at some of the things that are rising in cost, and we look at food, we look at fuel, it doesn't have that same, and which is of course very important to us, the cost of housing, right? The cost of living in terms of housing, whether it be rent or buying a home. I think there's a place where in Canada, everybody deserves a home. Well, not everybody wants one, number one. Number two, who's to state that everybody deserves one? That's a different conversation. But the point is that when we look at the cost of living going up, how do you look at it and you say
All right.
deflationary 5%? So give me a little bit more context for that.
So again, when you're even the question, and this is why people are so confused, because the
Mm-hmm.
question imposes a belief in the existing system manipulating your money. So what did housing used to look like? It used to be a utility. But
Mm-hmm.
when housing needs to protect you from losing money, then it's not a utility anymore. It becomes a store of value.
Right.
And so more and more people are trying to protect their assets by buying houses. And then
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't have anywhere to put if you're in China and and the acceleration of the debt is worse, you're going to move your money to Canada and put it in those assets. And all around the world, people are looking for a store of value versus a utility. So then housing runs up and it carries a monetary premium besides a utility. So now let's break those two things separately. In the utility of housing, has technology helped there too? Should prices of all things that go into houses? I've been to lumber mills. They're not the same as lumber mills that were 50 years ago. They're completely
100%.
automated.
Yeah.
Window manufacturing, transportation, energy, it should be coming down in price. So all of these things as a utility, housing too, might not fall as fast as a digital good, but it should also be falling. And then somebody will say, well, what about the land? The land is scarce. True. But the land is only scarce because you're driving monetary stimulus, staggering to make land scarce. So people are buying up whatever they can, because if you create more money, I have a simple saying to this: abundance and money equals scarcity everywhere. Scarcity and money equals abundance. And so if you just create more pieces of paper to measure everything, those pieces of paper are devalued, and the things that hold value better hold a monetary premium like the pieces of paper used to. And so what you're finding in here is people are so confused because they're measuring in a loop from a loop that has completely manipulated money, and they think they're protected inside that system, and they're not protected inside that system. All of that system is being repriced by Bitcoin.
Isn't it interesting, Jeff, is that, my wife and I bought Bitcoin back in, I think, 2017. And, it's not that we understood it then. We kind of did, but not really. But, at the end of the day, we were early adopters of a lot of technology. That's kind of how we're wired, not just technology, but things in general. We say yes first and then figure shit out afterwards. And even today, I've got some young staff in one of my businesses, and I'm doing a little bit of coaching with a couple of the young guys in that 24-year, they're at that point in their life where they're, what do I want to do? And I'm doing some work with them, and we're talking about money. And of course, that's one of the things. How do I live? And I said, what do you know about Bitcoin? And I'm shocked at how many people that age, how many young people actually don't go, no, I don't know that much about it. I hear it's kind of, uh, it's a bad thing. It's like used to launder, or it's used
Yep.
to, drugs or whatever story they've got around it. And I'm going, wow. So as I'm guiding and coaching, I go, here's my suggestion for you. open a Bitcoin account, go to ShakePay or whatever you want to, find a legitimate one, open it, understand it, get an account going, buy 25 bucks worth of Bitcoin. At least you have an account, and then start to understand it. Like it's like going along, but I'm shocked at how many, as big a news item as it is today, how few people are even going to look at it because there's some negative story around it. And I think that's going to change a lot in 2024. But when you're having these conversations around Bitcoin, where are you finding the best kind of understanding of adoption? Because to your point, people don't understand monetary policy. They don't understand QE, QT. It gets too, they don't even understand the possibility of the, American dollar or American cash not being a reserve currency, maybe in the future, or for sure in the future, depends who you want to talk to. But really, forget about understanding any of it. Understand that you are at risk by not doing anything, by not holding something like Bitcoin or even gold. I'm a gold fan, or real estate. Like those are things that we're saying we have to get outside of the system to the degree we can. Bitcoin's the only real way to do that, to get totally outside of the system. So I guess my question is that given your experience and just how much you speak to Bitcoin, is it easier to try and say you've got to preserve or work outside of the system? Like, how do you describe it? I guess I'm not
Yeah,
really clear on the question.
yeah, and so probably what I've already described will get some people thinking, right?
Yeah.
So why I think my book played a big role in getting people to understand is it forced them to ask them. It rattled around in their brain. Um, yes, the free market is deflationary. Yes, technology makes that happen faster, and they couldn't solve that incongruence, and then they had to solve it for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start, by solving it themselves, they realized they need to. You knew no government could just allow deflation because the debt would collapse. You knew nobody would vote for that. So we all vote to make the thing stronger against us, and we all get weaker as a result. So that would end up being a control system that took all of our power. And then as that happened, more people would yell at it, making it stronger, thinking there was a solve on one side of the political aisle or the other, when it would all just get worse and consolidate more into all big companies and AI controlling us. And that would rattle around as they understood the implications of what I was talking about. And then they would start to, where could I protect my money? Where could I protect my time outside of that? And that journey would typically lead them to Bitcoin. And through a long journey, because you had to unlearn most of what you've ever been taught. And you would have to go through, if the system is consolidating power against you from the system, that means everything you're reading from the system is also consolidating power against you, because it's controlled. So you'd have to look outside of that, and you'd have to challenge some of your hardest beliefs, right? That you've always known, and all of the media has ever reinforced, are challenging. And it's really hard for people to challenge their priors like that. Most people do exactly what you just said. They either ignore it or reject it,
Mm-hmm.
or they fight it. And they stay stuck. And even if they get it, normally what they do is they carry all their baggage into the new system, saying it's going to work like this, like I think it'll work, rather than the new rules that the new system imposes. It imposes the free market to the world, the
Mm-hmm.
entire world, meaning the output for the entire world. If you're measuring in Bitcoin, every single person on the planet gets richer every year. That's what it looks like. And inside the system, it'll look exactly opposite. But that's really hard. I know what I just said is hard to get the first
Yeah.
time, right? Even for you, even on this podcast, you're in it. I'll bet you, like the depth of knowledge to what it actually means. You're not there yet.
No, I'm not there. And I struggle between a couple of different things. So number one, as an educator and as a coach, I'm also trying to understand it in a way that I can translate it, or in a way that I can
Yep.
actually share that knowledge. And so even having the base of knowledge that I need to be able to say or to speak to it with some authority, and is a challenge for me. So I'm kind of stuck between these two worlds of going, and I dumb things down for myself, right? I'm going, okay, I don't need to know. I know enough to know this, that I need to get and preserve my capital outside of the system. And I break it down and make it that simple for
So
me.
that's actually that's great, and then you realize it's the only thing outside the system. So that's
Yeah.
another step, because if gold was outside the system, then gold would have held governments in check, and it wouldn't have been revalued every so often. Wouldn't have been
Mm-hmm.
controlled, but
Mm-hmm.
because gold always was centralized, and there's such a power to be able to steal a little bit of the productivity that should flow to society.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a greed to be able to do that. That because if you could skim off a little bit of the productivity that should be flowing in the form of lower prices, then you can imagine how much power that is to do that or revalue gold. So if gold could have worked to stop that, it would have worked to stop that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it would work for a little while. It would hold governments in check for a little while, but then they would always, it was hard to audit. It was hard to, because it had to be centrally located. People would say they had more than they did, and then you'd build a fractional reserve system on top of it. And then gold today is suppressed in a huge way by derivatives markets to be able to
Yeah.
keep it low. So it doesn't do the job because it's been captured by the system. That's why the
Mm-hmm.
decentralization and security is so important in Bitcoin, and why people should do the work there to say, and I always say, if it stays decentralized and secure, it is inevitable it reprices everything. That all
Yeah.
prices measure against it forever will fall. And I say if for one reason. So people do their own work to understand why it will.
It's, you mentioned gold, and you're right, it's still within the system, it's still manipulated. We're seeing some of the things that are unfolding in the world, central banks buying tons of gold. Why are they buying tons of gold? Well, there could be lots of explanation, or there could be a few explanations for it, but ultimately it's still within a system that is at third party risk. It is at the effect of whatever people are running it and manipulating, and they're doing all the thing, the powers that be, if you will. When we look at Bitcoin, just to kind of go down that path a little bit, it's just software. Nobody can touch it. Nobody can break it. It's not being, and it can't be manipulated. It is really pristine in its operation. It's just doing what it does.
Can I jump into that, because I think
Yeah,
this
please.
is another piece of confusion,
Yep.
and which would make a ton of sense why people would be confused there. You have manipulated money. They're looking at not just Bitcoin. They're looking at all these altcoins, and they're confused what
Yes.
is going on, and it's so massively confusing.
Good point.
So
Good point.
so one thing about in Bitcoin, and people, for anyone who's listening that wants to go deeper on this, I wrote a post that has become highly referenced in this space, and it's on my website, jeffbooth.ca, that talks about why only Bitcoin and what the world would look like on the transition and why it would be so confusing. So from that, it takes you from a first principles standpoint, why the decentralized and security of Bitcoin essentially sacrificed scalability of Bitcoin because of the way you had to build a blockchain, and then what other companies would do to try to essentially create something different because they couldn't be decentralized and secure. They would have to scale by sacrificing decentralization or security. But so I recommend people go and read that. But here's a way, higher level thing on why people are confused. We see companies way more often than we see technologies. So we see way more Googles, Amazons, and everything else than we see a change in technology like AI or electricity. Those come around more rare. They're more rare. And then we see protocols, super rare. So the internet was a protocol. Bitcoin is a protocol, and they come around very, very rarely. So instead of looking at Bitcoin as a company or software or anything else, it's way better to look at Bitcoin, the thing that people are thinking about, the asset class right now of Bitcoin, as the first layer of the new internet. And what it
Mm.
and what it is it's a protocol that's bounded by energy and creates energy abundance by its very existence. So that's the first layer of Bitcoin. So essentially, you've tied physics into software around energy. That's also why it can't be broken, because you
Right.
have decentralized energy all around the world that's chasing abundant energy and creating more energy as a result. That somebody would have to go through all of that energy to try to break through it, and it's impossible. And then behind that, it's protected by nodes like mine that audit that whole thing every 10 minutes to say were the rules followed. And there's tens to hundreds of thousands of those all around the world. And to try to change those, somebody would have to essentially say to me, you have to vote against your interests and the alignment, the honesty of this. And they would have to do that to hundreds of thousands of nodes, or maybe tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of nodes that now, for the first time in history, know what decentralization and security means for humanity. Good luck. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you realize that that's the new base layer of the new internet, bounded by energy, creating more energy in abundance, and all of the other things you're living in are somebody's abstract, I'm going to tell you what price it is because I'm going to make up more paper units or digital currency that has nothing to do with physics. You
Mm-hmm.
realize, okay, I know what system I'm going to measure from. And then what's building on top of that, I started, so I could move my time into this. I started a venture capital firm called Ego Death Capital. And just like the internet emerged in layers that gave more and more functionality at different layers, Bitcoin is emerging in layers. And now there's a transaction layer on top of Bitcoin. And that transaction layer, not just Bitcoin the asset, that transaction layer has grown 1,250% in the last 2 years. It's exploding. You have a network effect. You have a network effect, and you have a growth rate that's faster than the internet in both Bitcoin, the base layer, and the transaction layer on top of it. So there's now what's happening is entrepreneurs are racing into this and building more and more solutions on top, which we are in the very early stages of a new peer-to-peer internet. That right now, if you buy Bitcoin, you own a piece of it. You don't own the company on top of it. You own all companies built on top of it forever.
Right. And it's limited. There is an end supply. So
and there's an end supply, the 21 million units. Scarcity in money creates abundance. Those 21 million Bitcoin can't be changed without all of the consensus rules of all of our nodes saying we're going to vote against our own interests.
So when we talk about, when some of the pushback or some of the people are scratching their heads going, well, I can't transact in Bitcoin. Like I can't go to a store and buy stuff. And I go, well, that's not totally true. I've bought things with Bitcoin because the store that I was dealing with took Bitcoin. I chose to pay for it just to play with it. I learned that lesson. Don't ever do that again, Patrick. You're spending too much. Like I look at my Bitcoin, and I go, okay, well, I paid X for that, and now that Bitcoin, but I'm still thinking in fiat terms, which is really cracking me up, right? It's a stretch to get wrapped around that. And where I'm kind of going with this is that, my explanation to people, and maybe it's not the right explanation, Jeff, so I'll open it up to you. But as I'm going, listen, if it doesn't ever become transactable, your worst case scenario is you're going to take whatever Bitcoin you're holding and you've had it, and you're going to exchange it for the current value of whatever fiat currency you're transacting in, and then you'll use that fiat currency to transact. Is that a reasonable explanation for somebody who's pushing back, going, well, what's the point?
So if somebody does, yes, but I use Bitcoin every day. I pay for it. Like right now, I use it every day. I can't use it everywhere every day, but right now I use it every day. And anybody who will, if there's a business who will take it, I choose that business over a different business to be able to spend it. Because right now, I just buy more Bitcoin every day to be able to replace it.
Right.
And so over time, when I said how fast that network is growing, that would be like in 1996 saying the internet isn't going to work. Right. So that transaction network, by all evidence, is growing at that rate. And in some countries, specifically in the West, because we haven't had money that's been manipulated as much as in other countries, we don't see, we're closer to the money supply. So we're essentially the monopoly, and people furthest away from the monopoly go first. So you should see what's happening in Nigeria. You should see what's happening in Argentina. You should see what's happening in Malawi. I've been to all of these places and I've seen these communities that are completely, they're using it all the time. Now it's not everywhere yet,
Mm,
but network effects are typically local, in something like this. So if you had to get on a bus to go to the one Bitcoin provider to be able to use that, then you might not get on the bus. You might just use fiat every day. But as your fiat is breaking down more and more vendors are saying, wait, instead of paying 2.5% to Visa, I could charge zero and give more value to my customer because I can make more. They start taking Bitcoin, then more and more people do it, and more businesses, and then more and more people start to emerge, and that typically happens as a local phenomena first. And
mm,
what I'm saying where I am is all of these local places all over is now starting to connect all over. It's exploding. I can't
mm.
believe, and just for people that are still worried about this, or to that point, every time you talk to somebody who doesn't get this yet,
Mhm.
think about how early we are.
Well, that's yeah. In spite of all of the news and finally mainstream's picking it up more. I mean, there's ETFs been launched now. The Feds have kind of approved it, and I mean now it's starting to really gain some momentum, and I'm sure that it will start to grow really much quicker than it has in the past. Now, to your point though, and I was going to mention that is that you've traveled the world. And to your point, you've been in Africa, El Salvador. I think El Salvador is, I don't know if they're 100%, but they're pretty much 100% Bitcoin. It's
Yeah,
what they're trying to sell.
they're not. So on both sides, Bitcoiners pretend that it is, and then the IMF says they're not. They're not. It's somewhere in the. They're actually, even in El Salvador, it's pretty early in Bitcoin use,
Yeah,
business to business.
yeah,
But it's just changed the entire trajectory of the country, the hope, and everything else.
yeah. And that, I mean, that's the big thing. And now, so let's go. Let's kind of get to it because I know we're limited with time, and so the foundation of Bitcoin, how it is something. It is a store of value. It is something that I think everybody needs to get on their radar, do some research. I go back to just open an account, throw 25 bucks in it, get started, get your feet wet, just get going, and then, kind of discover afterwards what the real meaning of it is, rather than, wait and put it off and put it off. That's my, if there's some guidance in it, that's how I would approach it. But when you look at and you hear the stories of central bank digital currencies, more control, now I'm hearing stories start to emerge around bail-ins and what's happening in the banking world. Do you have any comments around that, Jeff, in terms of, again, it's about really safeguarding wealth. It's about uh, risk mitigation with what's going on globally. I mean, there's a lot of things unfolding in this world, any number of wars. Some would argue we're already in a world war. There's lots of argument for that when we start to see the I guess the unrest that's unfolding in the US. I mean, there's just so much going on, divisiveness and polarity and government breakdown. It could be a pretty frightening time. However, I also know that you're an optimist, so you don't see it the same, probably the same way. You're looking at it through a slightly different lens. Any comments around that, Jeff?
Yeah, well, if you've read my book,
Yes, I
and
have.
and it predicted all of these things, right?
It fired.
From
It actually what fired me up. It got me off my ass. So it was a very powerful book for me. So,
Yeah. So
anyways,
from the existing system that is based on theft, and that theft has to accelerate, then nobody would stay in that theft if knowingly, right? So what that would mean is from that existing system, there has to be more and more misinformation, and there has to be more control. And then because all political parties are essentially saying, I get more of the spoils than the other people, then you could see the divisiveness and all of the people inside that system fighting with each other, making that system stronger. Use an example. I'd take 100,000 people, march down the street, burn cars. I go home. It's all fixed. Where did the money come from to fix it? Came from you. Came from all of
Mhm.
us. It's
Mhm.
being stolen at an ever increasing rate. The only way then you can carry that on is you have to create an enemy inside your borders. Those are the bad people. We're the good people. People fall for it every time,
Yep.
and they make that stronger. The winning politician, still, because it's based on control, removes more individual rights and freedoms along the way, and then has to create a bigger enemy outside the borders. People fall for that too, so they go to war. They fight more and more. They both sides believe they're totally right. They reinforce it. Both sides make it worse, and that's where and it's just a control system based on theft.
Mhm.
Everybody that's not in Bitcoin, kind of on the others, are in that control system based on theft, making the system stronger with all of their actions in that control system, and then complaining about it. Using an example, so probably a lot of people that would be listening to your podcast are investors in Google and the Magnificent Seven, because
Mhm.
if you're not, you're losing money faster. So you're thinking you're making money in that in that. So what are you doing? Um, if Google increased the price to $5 a click today, you wouldn't use them anymore. So they're moving AI faster, removing labor as fast as they can to be able to give you more value. You use it every day as it's giving you more value, and then you invest in it, your cash in it, because it's one of the only places to save your money. So all of your actions are making this thing stronger against you as it's stealing more and more control from you. And then you wonder why the world looks like that.
Mhm.
The good news is Bitcoin is repricing Google too, and all its cash flows. The good news is it's repricing Nvidia and all its cash flows. The good news is repricing Facebook and all its cash flows. And every single person has a choice just to move more of their time and energy into the new system that is congruent with where we're going as a society. Most people won't. Most people will stay stuck, and it'll get worse and worse for them, and they will make it stronger, and they will believe totally it's the other person.
Do you? I know, like I say, we've spoke briefly a couple of times, and when you look into the future, I know that you like to wear a pretty optimistic view, but I don't think you're denying that there's going to be some discomfort and some pain as we go through these transitions. When you look into the future, Jeff, and you hear stories, or you hear, or you see, I don't even want to, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but when you look at the U.S. as a reserve currency, that's a big one. Everybody's going, it's going to collapse. How do you view that? Do you foresee that? It's like things priced in oil. How do
So,
you
so,
see
so, so let's go to what I just said about your actions create the world you want to
Yeah,
see, right? And they
yeah,
do. Like your view, your thoughts, words, actions create the world you want to view.
sure.
So, if all of those thoughts, words, and actions are inside the system that is making things worse, what would that look like? And what's your role in it? So
Mhm.
when people ask that, it's a crazy thing to me, because they're asking, when is the light switch that Bitcoin is takes over everything, and when is it essentially they're waiting until some event to now it's changed.
Yeah,
Patrick, I can tell I'm already living in the future.
yeah, yeah.
I,
We're in it.
like no, I'm living in the future, and every day it gets brighter. And
Yeah.
when I see all of the optimism around what's happening, and the people I'm with every day, and the incredible businesses that I get to invest in that are
Mhm.
building this future, I cannot believe that I get to do this. And
Mhm.
all it was is moving my energy to the new system. The so I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of one of the companies we funded. Um, so one of the companies we funded was doing about 50 million in trading volume in August. What do you think they did in January? So it's about 6 months later, 475 million. Day before yesterday, they did 125 million.
Wow.
So so they're growing at rates that only Google and Facebook and those grew at, but they're profitable, and their cash flows, they're denominated in Bitcoin, so they're growing their Bitcoin at a crazy rate on top of an asset that's growing if you're measuring in fiat dollars, is growing at a crazy rate. And so you're getting venture type returns on top of a venture type of asset. And that's just one of the companies we've invested in. All of the companies we're investing in look like that because we're constructing. And why do they look like that? Because they're providing people incredible value. And the value is denominated in Bitcoin terms. And it's so early on that. And then I look around a whole bunch of venture capital that's investing in the fiat world, and I go, this is insane.
So, I really get what you're saying, but I think the trap is, or the thought, it's like, in individuals are saying, well, there's a threat of hyperinflation. And it's, to your point, it's like people think there's an event. And, we would argue, no, it's not an event. It's actually, if you study history, this is a process and we're in the middle of it. Somebody's saying, well, if we're going to hit hyperinflation, when's it going to happen? And it's like, no, arguably
You're
in that system, we're
you're in
already
it.
in it. We're already in it.
You're in.
And
Yeah.
what you're suggesting, and I really love what you've shifted, even my own thought process around it. As long as we continue to operate in an old system under an old story, you're in it. You're actually in it. But here's the question I would have, Jeff, is that how do you escape it? How do you escape
You
it?
move more of your time. First, you're right. First, there's something in Bitcoin that people say because over and over again, don't trust, verify. Right. And so everything that we're talking about right now, you can audit. You could run your own node and you can audit everything that we're saying. And once you start to realize how much influence you have in the new system and creating this, you realize how much power you have. So I keep getting this. I said this in a speech recently. Somebody came up to me 2.5 years ago at a conference, and they introduced me to their 3-month-old daughter and wife. And he said to me, "You're responsible for this." Now, can you imagine hearing that? What goes through your mind? And he said, no, seriously, I was completely nihilistic. I didn't know and I was getting worse and worse by the day. And then I read your book and I listened to your podcast, and I started to learn about Bitcoin, and I realized I could move my energy into something that gave me more energy and around hope and abundance and truth around a whole bunch. And I saw it everywhere. And then I saw it, and then I met my wife, and she saw it everywhere. And it made me comfortable to be able to have a family. And so those little stories that I've heard now thousands of times from different people it is who we are. Right. And those people now doing that are then they move their energy to the future, and they see hope. And so those are really, and then, by the way, that makes it, I get emotional each time, not specifically because what they said, because I go to all of the people who have helped me. Because I didn't make the difference in the person's life. All it was an idea that they were ready to hear. And then I think about all of the people who have impacted me, so I could make that, to help with that idea. And it's what society looks like. It's what we've always looked like. And so what ends up happening is Bitcoin is connecting us together. One system is dividing us from each other. One system is connecting us back together. And if you're living in the system and it's open, you don't have to ask permission from anybody to do it. It's completely open, decentralized, and secure. All you have to do is learn why you might want to spend more of your time in the honest system. And as you do, your life changes.
Yeah. Jeff, there's a couple things that, what I've learned about you. So first and foremost, I love this conversation, and I'm bringing up more and more as I'm learning more, and so much more to go in terms of Bitcoin and the impact it can have in the world and in an individual's life. This is why I was really excited to have you back on the show. Natalie Bernal, who's a good friend of yours, had a great conversation with her, and really kind of opening up the conversation beyond which most people know me for, which is around real estate education. And I still believe in real estate as a store of value, but I'm starting to see the expansive conversation that we need to have into technology and Bitcoin. But for you, there's a fundamental that I've come to know about you and following you and having had some brief conversation. And that is that, and even when you're talking, so this is long-winded, but what I'm getting to around all of this is you're making a huge impact in the world. You're a busy dude. You got a lot on your plate. You're doing a lot of things, but you always have time and you find time to be able to get the message out there. What am I saying and why am I saying all this? Do you think now, given your journey and the businessman that you are and what you've accomplished, that getting this message out and making a difference is really part of your mission, part of your purpose? Do you operate from that kind of thought process?
I operate from thought process of it, and I'm going to be careful here because a lot of people would kind of, I think Bitcoin from a lot, it's a, you view reality from your consciousness. If you think if you think, okay, I'm smarter than everybody in Bitcoin, so I need to be this, or it's me and everything else, I don't need to be here. It'll just keep on going without me. Every 10 minutes, there's a ledger. Here's what I do think about though. My time matters to me, and if my time can impact others, that's great. Now then I have to watch. That's what I want. So the only thing we have is our time. Then I have to be careful that I don't tell myself a story to do just this and then take all my time from my family. So because it's really easy to have your ego kind of say I'm the one that matters. And so
I don't get any of
why
that
I
from
do
you, by
this
the way.
yeah, so yeah, so why I do this is because it's valuable for me too. It's valuable. I wouldn't do it if I didn't love the people that I meet. I would sometimes say yes to a podcast, but I wouldn't say yes to another one from somebody that I didn't care about. And so what ends up happening is you develop deep relationships and you care about them, and they expand. And by the way, that same thing has been extraordinary. It's the same thing that's made me so valuable. It's made my businesses so successful, or my business in Ego Death and the Capital, because when people see that in you, that it's so true, more and more people want to be around it, and you want to be around them too.
I love the context that you've given all of this, by the way, Jeff. And you have a hard stop, and I want to honor your time. I want to really, acknowledge you for coming out today and showing up, and the message that you give. A shout out for your book, The Price of Tomorrow. I read it 4 years ago, and it really changed. It set a new trajectory for me of all of the things that I'm looking at, from even from an investment point of view and how I view the world. It's pretty impactful in that way if you're open to that kind of a conversation. And I think sometimes people shut down around it. So given a couple of minutes we've got left to talk, what guidance would you give? Is there a piece of advice that you would give people? Mine is really simple. Go open an account, get into Bitcoin, and at least start to understand it from there. And that's my version of it. But what would you want to share with listeners as a kind of a parting comment?
That something that is for the first time in history. We don't have a prior in history of anything that's been decentralized and secure. What that means is all of our history books, all of our knowledge, all of economics, all of political systems have never seen this before. So it's completely normal to be confused, completely normal. And no matter where you are on that rabbit hole, just have some curiosity to maybe question why this might be more important than you think. And that curiosity will lead you to a whole bunch of other things. And what ends up happening is it creates so much conflict in ourselves because we're unwinding a whole bunch of beliefs which we viewed the world through. And those beliefs for us are true. Right? If you believe everybody's out to get you in the world, then that's what the world will look like to you.
Yeah.
But any version of your belief structure informs your reality. You literally create your own reality. So why this is hard is it's challenging a whole bunch of your beliefs. And that's hard for people to do. So whatever the level you're at going through, we call it in Bitcoin, the journey down the rabbit hole. It's confusing. It's confusing because you're having to work through these potentially false beliefs and decide whether you want to change to what this is or not, or stay where you are. And if you love where you are and the world is reflecting back everything positive, stay.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I'm going to say thank you again. And I do have to comment though, is that, from my own perspective, these conversations are really challenging for me as much as I've learned. And, when I have my show and this podcast and what I do in terms of my own coaching and understanding, is these are challenging for me. And it's really uncomfortable for me to have a conversation with somebody like you who understands to the degree that you understand things. And I'm going, gosh, just when I think I got it figured out, and I talk to somebody like you and I go, I got nothing figured out. And which isn't true, but it's really an uncomfortable conversation for me. That's my ego getting in the way of, opening up and getting outside of this existing system. It's really hard. And so I want to acknowledge you for your patience in, having conversations with my audience, but certainly with individuals like me who are trying to guide us through all of this and have these conversations. So I do appreciate it very much.
Just so you know, same thing I went through. So I didn't. It's not like I bought Bitcoin in 2009 or 2011 and said I did the same thing. Everybody goes through the same thing. I did, you did, and then you start to realize your own hypocrisy on the way through.
Yeah,
and then some people in Bitcoin, once they're in it, they've known for 2 weeks and they've now rewired. And then they think how can't those other people get it when they just 2 weeks ago or a month ago, they didn't. And they show up like that. I just realized I was like that. We all were.
Mm-hmm. It is uncomfortable, the learning curve. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. And I hope we can do it again. And I do appreciate all that you brought to the table in this conversation today. I know many will get a lot out of it. So thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick.